Dear friends, in our first reading, we read one of Moses' speeches advising the Israelites to observe the Lord's statutes and ordinances as they prepare to enter the promised land. It follows that keeping God's commandment is a prerequisite for entering the promised land. The people were also instructed not to change or add to any of the commandments. Later one night in our gospel passage, our Lord tells his audience that he came not to abolish the law and the prophets, but to fulfill them. Our Lord went on to say that those who follow the laws and impart them to others will be called great in heaven. The Israelites were privileged people, called to be God's own people. The reason for this was that God wanted them to be a good example to other nations, namely, that by seeing how morally sound and obedient they were to their God, other people could learn to turn to God. And so, Moses' instruction carries the idea that the people are not to forget the things that God did for them. By this, the people are always to remember God's interventions in their lives and report them to their children and their children's children. Also, when other nations come to see how obedient they are, they will admit that God is indeed near to his people. For they will see, indeed, this great nation is a wise and prudent nation. The nation of Israel is great. The greatness of Israel is because God is very near to the people. It is why Moses said, "For in truth, is there a nation as great as ours, whose gods are as near to it as the Lord our God is to us whenever we call upon him? And is there a nation as great as ours, whose statutes and norms are just as this law, which I'm placing before you today?" The answer to these questions, of course, is known. The Israelite nation is incomparably great because it is so closely connected to its God. The nation is also incomparably great because it is so closely connected to its laws. My dear friends, the Israelites were indeed privileged to have God so near to them. However, we are considered more privileged than them. In his book, God is Near Us, Pope Benedict XVI narrated how God is very close to us in the Eucharist. In other words, the presence of God among us is more felt than at the time of the Israelites. We not only feel God's presence in his words in the scriptures, but also receive it at the Eucharist. And so, if we are more privileged than the Israelites, then we ought to be a good example for others to learn from, so that they can turn to the Lord. Finally, like the Israelites, our possibility of entering our promised land, heaven, depends on how observant we are of God's ordinances, of loving him and our neighbors. Peace be with you.